got to meet Felix and Festus, Agrippa II, and you remember Festus and Agrippa II put Paul on trial, and when they were done with the trial, Agrippa said, well, if this guy hadn't appealed to Caesar, we could have let him go. So it ended off saying, you appeal to Caesar, well, then Caesar you will go. Well, if you go back a few chapters, it said that Paul was going to go here and here and here and here, and then go down to Jerusalem for the feast, and then to Italy, and then he was going to Rome. So, a trip from where he's at in Jerusalem all the way to Rome would be a very expensive trip. Now we get to see Paul gets a free trip. It's not exactly how he intends it, but it's a free trip. God gets him there without having to spend a dime. I guess that's God's way of economy, or being economical. I don't know. But Paul don't have to spend a dime to get there. And although he is a prisoner on the way, he has also got some liberties. We'll find out in a minute that he's with a lot of people. There's 276 people on this ship with Paul. The majority of them are going to be prisoners going to Rome. And you remember, if you've ever watched any kind of television shows about the Roman Empire and how they deal with prisoners, that's how they done it. So you remember what they did with prisoners back in the Roman days. It's the Colosseum, where they put them in there and they'd be gladiators fighting one another to the death, or fighting with lions or whatever. It was for amusement. It was amusement. And I like that word amusement because the word muse means to think. And when you add amusement, you add the to it, it means not to think. So you're going there just not thinking about nothing, just watching these people kill each other. So I think that's something to think about, that Paul, being a Roman citizen, has a trip with all these other killers and thieves and whatever that are probably looking at their last days here on earth. It's a testimony in itself on what goes on and how Paul's reacting to the situation. And a lot of those bad people may not be so bad. They may just be thieves because they were hungry or something of that nature. But you got to think that there are probably a lot of people got saved on this boat ride. And I'm just trying to set everything up so we know what's going on. The boat that we're going to be in, there's several different boats, but the one that wrecks is going to be similar to this. If you can't see it, it's just one sail, a couple of paddles in the back. There ain't no motor, there ain't no sonar, there ain't no radar, there ain't no engines. It's got 2 oars, and they pretty much depend on the one big sail on the top and a little sail on the front for the wind to take them. Sailboats today, they could tack, which means a bigger sail could throw wind behind another sail and you can go into the wind. This one you can't do that. When the wind starts blowing in the wrong direction, you're up the creek with 2 paddles. That's about it. And this boat would be around 180 foot long, 45 foot wide, and about 44 foot deep. And this is just a ship of around this era. It could have been a little different than that. Could have been bigger, smaller. Could have had more oars. There was one particular kind of ship that had a row of oars, and a lot of people get in it, and like you've seen it on TV, there'd be like 3 or 4 people rowing, and they would have a set of oars up here and a set of oars down here, and you'd have what you call an under rower. I think Paul uses that word, under rower, and that was the bottom of the barrel, the people that rowed the boat. So that wasn't what that was. It was a grain ship coming from Egypt going to Rome, because Rome, Egypt was the breadbasket for Rome, which means that, you know, they got their grain and stuff from Egypt. Egypt had the Nile River right there, so they would plant big crops there at the Nile, and, you know, when they grew up, they'd throw them on a ship and take them to Rome, because Rome, they don't have any kind of stuff like that. So just setting it up so you'll kind of have an idea. Does everybody got a map? One of these maps? If you got somebody next to you that's got a map, kind of look at it as we go along. If you see the lightly dotted lines, this is the trip he takes. And you see that it goes all the way out here to Malta. This is where the wind takes over. 400 or 500 miles out of the way. So we're going to dive right in. Chapter 27. Is that where we're at? 27. And when it was determined that we should sail into Italy, they delivered Paul and a certain other person unto one named Julius, a centurion of Augustus's band. You remember what a centurion is? The guy that's over 100 men. Was it a century's 100, right? Mm-hmm. He's one of the guys that's over 100 men. So let's just recap on centurions for a second. Anytime you see a centurion in the Bible, it's usually in a like favor. They were usually they were Romans' backbone, but they were real upstanding citizens. They were good people. A few examples. The guy, when Jesus died on the cross, the centurion looked up and said, "This truly was the Son of God." Remember him? Centurion that was in this book right here. Trying to think of his name. Anyway, Peter went to his house, and the Holy Spirit come on him, and they talked in tongues. That centurion was the first saved Gentile. Another instance, centurion come to Jesus in one of the Gospels. I can't remember. It might be in all of them. Centurion comes to Jesus and says, "Hey, one of my it was either his master or one of my slaves is sick."
His masters.
Was it one of the masters?
His children.
So he goes to him and says, one of my people are sick, and Jesus said, "Okay, I'll come over to your house, and we'll come and check on him." He said, No. You don't have to come to my house. All you gotta do is say it, and he'll be healed. And Jesus looked at him. He said, "Nowhere in Jerusalem have I found this kind of faith." So the centurions are looked highly upon in the Bible. They were good men, and as this one is gonna, you're gonna see this guy's gonna end up being a pretty good dude. So this is a centurion of Augustus Caesar's band, and that's the guy they're going to see. And entering into the ship of Adramyttium, you got a Bible, Adramyttium.
Read it for yourself.
We launched, meaning to sail by the coast of Asia, when Aristarchus and Macedonia and Thessalonica being with us. It's saying right here, Aristarchus, a Macedonian of Thessalonica. It was a guy from Thessalonica that was a Macedonian. That's what it's saying. It was that guy was with them. Aristarchus was he was in one of Paul's other letters. We'll probably find out about him later on down the road. 3, and the next day we touched at Sidon, and Julius courteously entreated Paul and gave him liberty to go unto his friends to refresh himself. You remember Sidon was one of his missionary journeys. He had created a church there. So we got Julius, this centurion's, and this is how it goes down, y'all. The centurion is over Paul. If Paul decides he don't want to come back, the centurion's going to have to take his place. He would be in big trouble. So, whatever the centurion seen in Paul, whether he was trustworthy or if he'd known him for a long time, or, he just seemed like a good person, I don't know. But the centurion trusted Paul with his life. Like, hey, you go and be with your church people and, refresh yourself. We've been on the sea for several days by now. And, come back. I thought that was, that's awesome. Verse 4, and when we had launched from thence, we sailed under Cyprus because the winds were contrary. If you want to look at your map, you can see Cyprus. They didn't go the route they wanted to because of the wind, so because it was contrary, it was against them. 5, and when we had sailed over the sea of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we came to Myra, a city of Lycia. And there this centurion found a ship of Alexandria sailing into Italy and put us thereon. And if I ain't mistaken, this is Alexandria of Egypt. This will be the grain ship they'll be on. And when we had sailed slowly many days and scarce we come over against Nidus, whatever that place is. The wind not suffering us, we sailed under Crete over against Salmon. And hardly passing it, came onto a place which is called Fair Havens. So, I want to point out some words. Scarcely, hardly, suffering. They're going into the wind and they're having a hard time getting where they're going. Storms sometimes bring change in our life. And, some people say change is good. But if it's a change that you can't control, it's going to be hard, scarce, it's going to be all these uncomfortable things. And they get to this place called Fair Havens. Sounds like a nice place, don't it? Fair Havens. Sounds like a good place to stay. When God gives you a place like that, it might be a good idea to stay there. We're going to see what happens. Where are we at? 8? And hardly passing it, came unto a place which is called Fair Havens. Nigh whereunto we the city of Lycia. Now when much time was spent, and when sailing was now dangerous, because the fast was now already past, Paul admonished them. The fast is being passed. What this means is when winter time's coming, they'll fast. They'll start saving food, and this would be around the middle of October, about what it is now. Hurricane season. The wind, the winds out there on the water pick up because the temperature's changing. You got hot and cold hitting each other, and the wind's getting picked up, and it's unpredictable. Now we have a thing called radar. We can look way on out yonder, and we can see the sky swirling and stuff going on, and hey, there's a storm coming. We don't need to go. But here, you don't have that. Verse 10. And said unto them, sirs, okay, I missed part of it. Paul admonished them, and said unto them, sirs, I perceive that this voyage will be with hurt and much damage, not only of the landing, the laden, and the ship, but also of our lives. The laden, that would be all the grain and all the stuff that was on the ship being transported. So he's saying, you know what? I perceive that this is going to be hurtful to the ship, to the stuff that's on the ship, and to our lives. if we go out there at this time. And by this time, you know, he's already went on 3 missionary journeys. He's been shipwrecked like 3 times. He spent a night and a day out in the ocean. You know, just because he's a crazy old preacher don't mean that he ain't been around the
block.
Yeah, he's been on the ship a time or two. But instead of listening to God, we'll see what these people did. 11, nevertheless, the centurion believed the master and the owner of the ship more than those things which were spoken by Paul. So instead of listening to one of God's people, he's listening to the guy that's professional. Hey, I drive the ship. It's my ship. I know what's going on. I can drive the ship. You know, we're going. 12, and because the haven was not commodious to winter in, commodious. Well, I'm going to read the whole thing and I'll go back to this. And more part advised to depart thence also, if by any means they might attain to Phoenicia, and there to winter, which is a haven of Crete, and layeth toward the southwest and northwest. Commodious to winter. It all boils down to there's 270 people on this boat. We'll find out there's 276 people on this boat. This is a small little town, and this place right here, Phoenicia, right down the street, it's only 40 or 60 miles. You can look at your map. You can see Crete. This is why I got you a map, because I want to see where at Crete. They want to go from Lycia right here at that little island to Phoenix, which is not very far, 30, 40 miles. Because this little place right here that they're at is going to be boring for the next 3 months. There ain't nothing to do. But right down here, you know, we got all kinds of stuff to do. There's casinos, strip clubs, whatever you want to do. It's there. We can go there. And you think I'm joking. I'm saying this, but I'm being serious. There's food. There's places to eat. There's lots of people. But right here where we're at, you know, it's boring here. This is just a kind of just fend for ourselves. It's not going to be a good place to stay. So with all the men agreeing, saying, yeah, let's go down here, they're picking the worldly thing over, you know, God's advice, and they're finna get in trouble. We're fixing to see what happens. Okay. 13, and when the south wind blew softly, supposing that they had obtained their purpose, loosing thence, they sailed close by Crete. So they knew it was going to get rough, so they was going to stay real close to the edge, you know. And you got to think the boat's 40 foot deep because it's full of grain. So you got to get way on out there to sail close. So how close is close? It's not that close because you got to be at least 100 foot of water, or you know, it gets to rocking or something, you hit the bottom. So they're going towards Crete. Or going towards Phoenix, down the side of Crete. But not long after there, you know, everything looks good, smooth sailing, the wind's barely blowing. The wind's going the way we need it to go. We just got to go 40 miles down the road. But not long after there arose against it a tempestuous wind, called Aeroculodon or Aeroclydon. And Aeroclydon. I just want to say one thing. You know, you look at the Weather Channel and you see these big storms coming, like Michael just come through. I know 3 or 4 Michaels. They're real nice. You know, that's not a very intimidating name. But the Weather Channel comes an Aeroclydon is how you say this. If the Weather Channel will come on and say a storm's coming, it's an Aeroclydon, I think I would start packing my stuff. Because Aeroclydon sounds a whole lot worse than Michael, you know what I mean? We do that, we sugarcoat stuff and we make it sound, you know, not as bad as it is. Like sepsis, this sepsis, I mean, I never even knew what sepsis was. I mean, like a cold. Why don't they call it like, something bad, like infected death or something. I mean, then you would be worried about it. Hey, we need to put them on a prayer list. They got infected death. Now, sepsis does not sound that serious, you know? And that's something I wanted to point out. That's something I was saying. I'm like, why do we name stuff little names when it should be like, we need to blow it out of proportion to make it sound as bad as it is.
Most of them you can't pronounce when they name them.
Hey, they got letters for it.
So, the only thing I could think is this is a hurricane. An oraculodon, a tempestuous wind, however you want to say it. And when the ship was caught and could not bear up into the wind, we let her drive. So they're saying right here, when the wind started blowing the way they wasn't wanting to go, we just, why fight it? Just let it take us and we'll figure it out when we get there. And running under a certain island, which is called Clauda, we had much work to come by the boat. Hey, the boat was a complete wreck by then. We had to fix the boat up. Which when they had taken up, they used helps undergirding the ship, and fearing lest they should fall into the quicksand, struck sail, and so were driven. I think that kind of speaks for itself, but this is one thing I wanted to add. The boat is full of grain that's very heavy. It ain't nothing but wood with slats of wood. What they would do is take this undergirding, they would take all the ropes that they had, would throw them over, get them back over to the other side, and they would winch them tight, and they would kind of make like a net under the boat. That way, I'm thinking this thing is probably done got beaten, bashed around, and they're taking on some water. So they're trying to tighten everything back up, because when they start hitting the ground, it's gonna knock holes in it, and it's gonna break it apart. So they've done undergirded the boat. And fearing that they were going to hit the sandbars and whatnot, they struck sail and tried to get out of there because the water wasn't very deep. 18, and we, being exceedingly tossed with the tempest, the next day they lightened the ship. And the third day we cast out with our own hands. And you got to pick up on this we. You remember who's writing this book is Luke. This is Luke part 2, Acts. So Luke is with him. He is on there with him, and I want to point this out. The only way that a person could take another person with them on a trip like this, if they were in trouble or if they were on their way to a judgment, was the only way to take them would be Luke and this other guy. You'll find out there's 2 people with Paul. They would have had to win as his slaves. So, or either pay their way. There's 2 options. They would have had to pay for the trip or go under Paul as a slave. So that's just something to point out. That's something I read across. So, they're getting tossed around and they're starting to throw stuff out of the ship, lighten up the ship. Hey, the ship's 40 foot in the water. We're going to lighten it up. Maybe it'll be 30 foot in the water. Not when you're hitting the ground, it ain't. If you hit the ground and a hole gets in the boat, then there ain't nothing gonna be out of the water. And the third day we cast out with our own hands the tackling of the ship. This tackling is a broad word for the couches, the sofas, the whatever, anything that was not bolted down, that was tackling. We throwed it off the ship. And when neither sun nor stars in many days appeared, and no small tempest lay on us. I like this no small tempest. King James just can't say a big storm, a big tempest. It was no small tempest. It was a big storm. All hope that we should be saved was taken away. When you read across this, you don't really realize how big of a deal not to see the sun or the stars is. But if you don't have radar, sonar, a compass, when you can't see the sky in the middle of an ocean where you can't see nothing but water, those things are very important to have.
You lose
'Cause,
direction quick.
yeah, what are you doing going in circles out there? You ain't got any kind of
Direction.
bearing at all. So they've done lost complete hope. The only one here that's got any kind of bearings is Paul. So by then all hope of being saved was taken away. 21. But after a long abstinence, Paul stood forth in the midst of them and said, Sirs, ye have hearkened unto me, and now not have loosed from Crete, and to have gained this harm and loss. Paul stood up and in the midst of all this stuff, he didn't do it in the first day or so. He waited until he could, you'll see that he's fixing to encourage him in 22, but I just want to point this out. Paul stood up and said, hey, I told you so. You didn't listen to me. And now we've done lost our way, and we're in all this harm, and you've lost all your stuff. And it was all because you didn't listen to me. And I hate that more than anything. I told you so. Every now and again, believe it or not, I'm wrong, and I have to hear I told you so from that one. And I hate hearing I told you so. So,
You do the same thing to me.
I told you so. Paul's pretty much standing up there saying, I told you so. We shouldn't have left where we was at. And I lost my spot, sorry.
22.
For there stood by me, okay, so he just explained to him, I told you so. We done, our lives are in danger. We done lost all this stuff. And then 23, for there stood by me this night the angel of God, whose I am, and who I serve, saying, Fear not, Paul, thou must be brought before Caesar, and lo, God hath given thee all them that sailed with thee. Now, this is kind of hard to understand, but it's saying that the God Paul serves, God, our God, had sent an angel of the Lord down and said, Paul, you're going to be safe, and everybody on the boat's going to be safe. You got some work to do still. We're taking you to Rome. I promised you to go to Rome a couple of chapters ago. I said, you did good, be of good cheer. You remember Paul gave that sermon to him and said the word Gentile, and everybody went nuts, and Rome locked him up. And Christ come to him and said, be of good cheer, Paul. You've testified of me. And you're going to Rome. So, he'd already been promised to go to Rome, so here again, you're going to Rome, Paul. So he just told these people, hey, God has promised all of our lives to be saved. Be of good cheer. I lost my spot again, y'all, I'm sorry. 24, saying, Fear not, Paul. 25. Wherefore, sirs, be of good cheer, for I believe God that it shall be even as it was told me. Howbeit we must be cast upon a certain island. Okay, here goes the reason for the storm. So Paul said, hey, I told you so, but guess what? We're not going to die in this storm. This storm was meant for us to be at another island. We're going to be cast upon an island. 27, but when the 14th night was come, as we were driven up and down in Adria, about midnight, the shipmen deemed that they drew near to some country. They were thinking they were getting close to land, and sounded and found it was 20 fathoms. And then they had gone a little further, they sounded again and found at 15 fathoms. Let me explain this. Sounded just means it took a weight, tied it to a rope, and dropped it off the side of the boat. Pulled the weight up and counted how far it was to the weight. That tells you the water depth. So, we got 120 foot right here. That's what it ended up being, 120 foot. We go a little while, we drop the rope again. We measure it out. It's 90 foot. Hey, we're getting somewhere. We're getting closer to land because the ground's getting closer to the boat. That's what they're going on here. Then fearing lest we should, that's 29, have fallen upon rocks, they cast forth anchors out of the stern and wished for the day. So it was midnight. They done the soundings. They figured out they were going towards land. So, we're going to all try to rest. We can't see nothing. It's dark. The clouds are still covered up. We're going to throw out the anchors and just pray for daytime so we can see something. 30, and as the shipmen were about to flee out of the ship, when they had let down the boat in the sea under color as though they were casting anchors out of the foreship. So they casted out the anchors in the back. They were going to cast out the anchors in the front, but instead of casting out the anchors, they were acting like they were casting out the anchors. But, big ships have this little dinghy